On this occasion, the presents were unusually good. The Hobbit children were so excited that for a while they almost forgot about eating. There were toys the like of which they had never seen before, all beautiful and some obviously magical. Many of them had indeed been ordered a year before and had come all the way from the mountain and from Dale, and were of real dwarf make. When every guest had been welcomed and his family inside and was finally inside the gate, there were songs, dances, music, games, and of course, food and drink. There were 3 official meals: lunch, tea, and dinner, or supper. But lunch and tea were marked chiefly by the fact that at those times all the guests were sitting down and eating together. At other times there were merely lots of people eating and drinking continuously from 11 Cs until 6:30, when the fireworks started. The fireworks were by Gandalf. They were not only brought by him, but designed and made by him. And the special effects, set pieces, and flights of rockets were let off by him. But there were also a generous distribution of squibs, crackers, bacca wrappers, sparklers, torches, and dwarf candles, elf fountains, goblin barkers, and thunderclaps. They were all superb. The art of Gandalf improved with age. There were rockets like a flight of scintillating birds singing with sweet voices. There were green trees with trunks of dark smoke. Their leaves opened like a whole spring unfolding in a moment, and their shining branches dropped glowing flowers down upon the astonished hobbits, disappearing with a sweet scent just before they touched their upturned faces. There were fountains of butterflies that flew glittering into the trees. There were pillars of colored fires that rose and turned into eagles or sailing ships, or a phalanx of flying swans. There was a red thunderstorm and a shower of yellow rain. There was a forest of silver spears that sprang suddenly into the air with a yell like an embattled army, and came down again into the water with a hiss like 100 hot snakes. And there was also one last surprise in honor of Bilbo, and it startled the hobbits exceedingly, as Gandalf intended. The lights went out, a great smoke went up. It shaped itself like a mountain seen in the flames. Out flew a red golden dragon, not life-size, but terribly lifelike. Fire came from its jaws, its eyes glared down, there was a roar, and he whizzed 3 times over the heads of the crowd. They all ducked, and many fell flat on their faces. The dragon passed like an express train, turned a somersault, and burst over Bywater with a deafening explosion. "That is the signal for supper," said Bilbo. The pain and alarm vanished at once, and the prostrate hobbits leaped to their feet. There was a splendid supper for everyone. For everyone, that is, except those invited to the special family dinner party. This was held in the great pavilion with the tree. The invitations were limited to 12 dozen, a number also called by the hobbits 1 gross, though the word was not considered proper to use of people, and the guests were selected from the families to which Bilbo and Frodo were related, with the addition of a few unrelated friends, such as Gandalf. Hobbits were easygoing with their children in the matter of sitting up late, especially when there was a chance of getting them a free meal. Bringing up young hobbits took a lot of provender. There were many Bagginses and Boffins, also many Tooks and Brandybucks. There were various Grubbs, relations of Bilbo Baggins's grandmother, and various Chubs, connections of his Took grandfather, and a selection of Burrowses, Bulgers, Bracegirdles, Brockhouses, Goodbodies, Hornblowers, and Proudfoots. Some of these were only very distantly connected with Bilbo, and some of them had hardly ever been in Hobbiton before, as they lived in remote corners of the Shire. The Sackville Bagginses were not forgotten. Otho and his wife Lobelia were present. They disliked Bilbo and detested Frodo, but so magnificent was the invitation card, written in golden ink, that they felt it was impossible to refuse. Besides, Their cousin Bilbo had been specializing in food for many years, and his table had a high reputation. All the 144 guests expected a pleasant feast, though they rather dreaded the after-party dinner speech of their host, an inevitable item. He was liable to drag in bits of what he called poetry, and sometimes after a glass or two would allude to the absurd adventures of his mysterious journey. The guests were not disappointed. They had a very pleasant feast, in fact an engrossing entertainment, rich, abundant, varied, and prolonged. The purchase of provisions fell almost to nothing throughout the district in the ensuing weeks, but as Bilbo's catering had depleted the stocks of most stores, cellars, and warehouses for miles around, that did not matter much. After the feast, more or less, came the speech. Most of the company were, however, now in a tolerant mood, at that delightful stage which they called filling up the corners. They were sipping their favorite drinks and nibbling at their favorite dainties, and their fears were forgotten. They were prepared to listen to anything and to cheer at every full stop. My dear people," began Bilbo, rising in his place. "Hear, hear," they shouted, and kept on repeating it in chorus, seeming reluctant to follow their own advice. Bilbo left his place and went and stood on a chair under the illuminated tree. The lights of the lanterns fell on his beaming face, and the golden buttons shone on his embroidered silk waistcoat. They could all see him standing, waving one hand in the air. The other was in his trouser pocket. "My dear Bagginses and Boffins," he began again, "my dear Tooks and Brandybucks, and Grubbs and Chubbs and Burrowses and Hornblowers, and Bulgers, Bracegirdles, Good Bodies, Brockhouses, and Proud Foots." "Proud feet," shouted an elderly hobbit from the back of the pavilion. His name, of course, was Proudfoot, well merited. His feet were large, exceptionally furry, and both were on the table. "Proudfoots," repeated Bilbo. "Also, my good Sackville Bagginses, that I welcome back at last to Bag End. Today is my 111th birthday. I am 11 today. Hooray, hooray, many happy returns," they shouted, and they hammered joyously on the tables. Bilbo was doing splendidly. This was the sort of stuff they liked, short and obvious. "I hope you all are enjoying yourselves as much as I am." Deafening cheers, cries of yes and no, noises of trumpets and horns, pipes and flutes, and other musical instruments. There were, as has been said, many young hobbits present. Hundreds of musical crackers had been pulled. Most of them bore the mark Dale on them, which did not convey much to most of the hobbits, but they all agreed they were marvelous crackers. They contained instruments small, but of the perfect make and enchanting tones. Indeed, in one corner, some of the young Tooks and Brandybucks, supposing Uncle Bilbo to have finished, since he had plainly said all that was necessary, now got up an impromptu orchestra and began a merry dance tune. Master Everard Took and Miss Melilot Brandybuck got on a table with bells in their hands, began to dance the Springle Ring. Pretty dance, but rather vigorous, but Bilbo had not finished. Seizing a horn from a youngster nearby, he blew 3 loud hoots. The noise subsided. "I shall not keep you long," he cried. Cheers from all the assembly. "I have called you all together for one purpose." Something in the way that he said this made an impression. There was almost silence, and 1 or 2 of the Tooks pricked up their ears. "Indeed, for 3 purposes. First of all, to tell you that I am immensely fond of you all, and that 11 years is too short a time to live among such excellent and admirable hobbits." Tremendous outbursts of approval. "I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half as well as you deserved." This was unexpected and rather difficult. There was some scattered clapping, but most of them were trying to work it out and see if it came to a compliment. Secondly, to celebrate my birthday. Cheers again. I should say our birthday, for it is, of course, also the birthday of my heir and nephew, Frodo. He comes of age and into his inheritance today. Some perfunctory clapping by the elders, some loud shouts of Frodo, Frodo, jolly old Frodo from the juniors. The Sackville Bagginses scowled and wondered what was meant by coming into his inheritance. Together we score 144. Your numbers were chosen to fit this remarkable total. One gross, if I may use the expression. No cheers. This was ridiculous. Many of his guests, and especially the Sackville Bagginses, were insulted, feeling sure they had only been asked to fill up the required number, like goods in a package. One gross indeed, vulgar expression. It is also, if I may be allowed to refer to ancient history, the anniversary of my arrival by barrel at Esgaroth at the Long Lake. Though the fact that it was my birthday slipped my memory on that occasion. I was only 51 then, and birthdays did not seem so important. The banquet was very splendid, however, and I had a bad cold at the time. I remember and could only say, "Thank you very much." I now repeat it more correctly. Thank you very much for coming to my little party. Obstinate silence. They all feared that a song or some poetry was now imminent, and they were getting bored. Why couldn't he stop talking and let him drink his health? But Bilbo did not sing or recite. He paused for a moment. Thirdly and finally, he said, "I wish to make an announcement." He said the words so loudly and suddenly that everyone sat up who still could. I regret to announce, though, as I said, 11 years is far too short a time to spend among you. This is the end. I am going. I am leaving now. Goodbye. He stepped down and vanished. There was a blinding flash of light, and the guests all blinked. When they opened their eyes, Bilbo was nowhere to be seen. 144 flabbergasted hobbits sat back speechless. Old Proudfoot removed his feet from the table and stamped. Then there was a dead silence, until suddenly, after several deep breaths, every Baggins, Boffin, Took, Brandybuck, Grub, Chub, Burrow, Bulger, Bracegirdle, Brockhouse, Goodbody, Hornblower, and Proudfoot began to talk all at once. It was generally agreed that the joke was in very bad taste, and more food and drink were needed to cure the guests of shock and annoyance. "He's mad. I always said so," was probably the most popular comment. Even the Tooks, with a few exceptions, thought Bilbo's behavior was absurd. For the moment, most of them took it for granted that his disappearance was nothing more than a ridiculous prank. But old Rory Brandybuck was not so sure. Neither age nor an enormous dinner had clouded his wits, and he said to his daughter-in-law, Esmeralda, "There's something fishy in this, my dear. I believe that Mad Baggins is off again, silly old fool. But why worry? He hasn't taken the victuals with him." He called loudly to Frodo to send the wine around again. Frodo was the only one present who had said nothing. For some time he had sat silent beside Bilbo's empty chair, and ignored all the remarks and questions. He had enjoyed the joke, of course, even though he had been in the know. He had difficulty in keeping from laughter at the indignant surprise of the guests. But at the same time he felt deeply troubled. He realized suddenly that he loved the old hobbit dearly. Most of the guests went on eating and drinking and discussing Bilbo Baggins's oddities, past and present, but the Sackville Bagginses had already departed in wrath. Frodo did not want to have any more to do with the party. He gave orders for more wine to be served, then he got up and drained his own glass silently to the health of Bilbo, and slipped out of the pavilion. As for Bilbo Baggins, even while he was making his speech, he had been fingering the golden ring in his pocket, the magic ring that he had kept secret for so many years. As he stepped down, he slipped it on his finger, and he was never seen by any hobbit in Hobbiton again. He walked briskly back to his hole and stood for a moment listening with a smile to the din in the pavilion and to the sounds of merrymaking in other parts of the field. Then he went in, took off his party clothes, folded up and wrapped in tissue paper his embroidered silk waistcoat, and put it away. Then he put on quickly some old untidy garments, fastened around his waist a worn leather belt, and fastened round his waist a worn leather belt. On it hung a short sword in a battered black scabbard. From a locked drawer smelling of mothballs, he took out an old cloak and hood. They had been locked up as if they were very precious, but they were so patched and weather-stained that their original color could hardly be guessed. It might have been dark green. They were rather too large for him. He then went into his study, and from a large, strong box took out a bundle wrapped in old cloths, and a leather-bound manuscript, and also a large, bulky envelope. The book and bundle he stuffed into the top of a heavy bag that was standing there, already nearly full. In the envelope he slipped his golden ring and its fine chain, and then sealed it and addressed it to Frodo. At first he put it on the mantelpiece, but suddenly he removed it and stuck it in his pocket. At that moment the door opened and Gandalf came quickly in. "Hello," said Bilbo. "I wondered if you would turn up." "I am glad to find you visible," replied the Gandalf, sitting down in a chair. "I wanted to catch you and have a few final words. I suppose you feel that everything has gone off splendidly and according to plan?" "Yes, I do," said Bilbo. "Though that flash was surprising. It quite startled me, let alone the others. A little addition of your own, I suppose." "It was. You have wisely kept the ring secret all these years, and it seemed to be necessary to give your guests something else that would seem to explain your sudden banishment, and would spoil my joke. You are an interfering old busybody," laughed Bilbo, "but I expect you to know best, as usual." "I do, when I know anything, but I don't feel too sure about this whole affair. It has now come to the final point. You have had your joke and alarmed or offended most of your relatives, and given the whole Shire something to talk about for 9 days. Or 99, more likely. Are you going any further?" "Yes, I am. I feel I need a holiday, a very long holiday. As I have told you before, probably a permanent holiday. I don't expect I shall return. In fact, I don't mean to. And I have made all the arrangements. I am old, Gandalf. I don't look it, but I am beginning to feel it in my heart of hearts. Well preserved indeed," he snorted. "Why, I feel all thin, sort of stretched, if you know what I mean, like butter that has been scraped over too much bread. That can't be right. I need a change or something." Gandalf looked curiously and closely at him. "No, it does not seem right," he said thoughtfully. "No, after all, I believe your plan is probably the best. Well, I've made up my mind anyway. I want to see the mountains again, Gandalf. Mountains. And then find somewhere where I can rest. In peace and quiet, without a lot of relatives prying around, and a string of confounded visitors hanging on the bell. I might find somewhere where I can finish my book. I have thought of a nice ending for it." And he lived happily ever after to the end of his days. Gandalf laughed. "I hope he will, but nobody will read the book however it ends." "Oh, they may in years to come. Frodo has read some already. As far as it has gone, you'll keep an eye on Frodo, won't you?" "Yes, I will. 2 eyes, as often as I can spare them." "He would come with me, of course, if I asked him. In fact, he offered to once, just before the party. But he does not really want to yet. I want to see the wild country again before I die, and the mountains. But he is still in love with the Shire, with woods and fields and little rivers. He ought to be comfortable here. I am leaving everything to him, of course, except a few oddments. I hope he will be happy when he gets used to being on his own. I feel it's time he was his own master now." "Everything," said Gandalf. "The ring as well. You agreed to that, you remember." "Yes, well, I suppose," stammered Bilbo. "Where is it?" "In an envelope, if you must know," said Bilbo impatiently. There on the mantelpiece. Well, no, here it is in my pocket. He hesitated. Isn't that odd now? He said softly to himself. Yet after all, why not? Why shouldn't it stay there? Gandalf looked again very hard at Bilbo, and there was a gleam in his eyes. I think, Bilbo, he said quietly, I should leave it behind. Don't you want to? Well, yes and no. Now it comes to it, I don't feel like parting with it at all. I may say, and I don't really see why I should. Why do you want me to? He asked, and a curious change came over his voice. It was sharp with suspicion and annoyance. You are always badgering me about my ring, but you have never bothered me about the other things that I got on my journey. No, but I had to badger you, said Gandalf. I wanted the truth. It was important. Magic rings are, well, magical, and they are rare and curious. I was professionally interested in your ring, you may say, and I still am. I should like to know where it is if you go wandering again. Also, I think you have had it quite long enough. You don't need it any more, Bilbo, unless I am quite mistaken. Bilbo flushed, and there was an angry light in his eyes. His kindly face grew hard. Why not? He cried. And what business is it of yours, anyway? To know what I do with my own things. It is my own. I found it. It came to me. Yes, yes, said Gandalf, but there is no need to get angry. If I am, it is your fault, said Bilbo. It is mine, I tell you, my own. My precious, yes, my precious. The wizard's face remained grave and attentive. Only a flicker in his deep eyes showed that he was startled and indeed alarmed. It had been called that before, he said, but not by you. But I say it now, and why not? Even if Gollum said the same once, it's not his now but mine, and I shall keep it, I say. Gandalf stood up. He spoke sternly. You would be a fool if you do, Bilbo. You make that clearer with every word you say. It has got far too much hold on you. Let it go, and then you can go yourself and be free. I'll do as I choose and go as I please, said Bilbo obstinately. Now, my dear hobbit, said Gandalf. All your long life we have been friends. You owe me something. Come, do as you promise. Give it up. Well, if you want my ring yourself, say so, cried Bilbo. But you won't get it. I won't give my precious away, I tell you. His hand strayed to the hilt of his small sword. Gandalf's eyes flashed. It will be my turn to get angry soon. If you say that again, I shall. Then you will see Gandalf the Grey uncloaked. He took a step towards the hobbit, and he seemed to grow tall and menacing. A shadow filled the little room. Bilbo backed away to the hall, breathing hard, his hand clutching at his pocket. They stood there for a while, facing one another, and the air of the room tingled. Gandalf's eyes remained bent on the hobbit. Slowly his hands relaxed, and he began to tremble. I don't know what has come over you, Gandalf, he said. You have never been like this before. What is it all about? It is mine, isn't it? I found it, and Gollum would have killed me if I hadn't kept it. I'm not a thief, whatever he said. I have never called you one, Gandalf answered, and I am one neither. I am not trying to rob you, but to help you. I wish you would trust me as you used to. He turned away, and the shadow passed. He seemed to dwindle again to an old gray man, bent and troubled. Bilbo drew his hand over his eyes. I am sorry, he said, but I felt so queer, and yet it would be a relief in a way to not to be bothered with it anymore. It has been so growing on my mind recently. Sometimes I have felt it was like an eye looking at me, and I am always wanting to put it on and disappear. Don't you know, or wondering if it is safe, pulling it out to make sure. I tried locking it up, but I found I couldn't rest without it in my pocket. I don't know why, and I don't seem able to make up my mind.